Welcome to Activate Your Introvert, a podcast by me, John Baker, for entrepreneurs and business leaders to help them tackle the 33% productivity gap due to ignorance of introversion, helping you unlock more productivity and creativity so you get a better business. This week, successful business leaders and introversion. I'm interviewing David Hyner, a speaker and researcher into goal setting and performance. And if you'd like to talk to me about any of the issues raised in this week's podcast, there's more details at introvertinbusiness.co.uk. Or if you'd like me to speak at your conference or work with your team to help unlock productivity, I'd love to talk to you. Details are on the website. David, would you like to introduce yourself to start off with?
Thank you, John, and thanks for inviting me on the show. Really appreciate it. I am a researcher and a globally to just about 1 million people now. And as a researcher, I've spent the last 22 years, as of March 2020, and interviewing 258 top-achieving men and women from all walks of life, from all over the world, but on the specific subject of goal setting and personal effectiveness.
Wow, that's amazing. Must have learned a hell of a lot during that time. And I guess as well as that, as a byproduct, some of the people you've been talking to have been introverts. You've discovered that as well.
It's been surprising, John, and I'll be honest with you. Much to my surprise, I discovered that a fair old chunk of them have dyslexia. And whilst I wouldn't be able to put an accurate percentage, I could stick my finger in the air and have a guess that probably 25-30% of them or more would probably be classed as introverts.
And how does that affect them?
Well, to give some example, I mean, they might call themselves introverts, but when I work with chief executive groups, these are business owners who run businesses of between 1 and 400 million turnover. I will spot introverts in a room, but my ego might think that they are not engaging in the session. And when you're at the front of a room presenting and someone's not engaging, there is a danger that our insecurities will begin to kick in, and the lack of communication or inappropriate body language might suggest to the presenter that they're not being liked or they don't like the content. But actually, that can be far from the truth. It can be just that they're processing information, and we shouldn't make assumptions. Just as at the extreme of extroverts and at the extremes of introverts, sometimes we can give out the wrong signals. I think sometimes we should try and meet in the middle as people so that we accept that there will be extroverts and we need to communicate with those differently. And there are introverts with whom we need to communicate differently.
So it's about how we choose to communicate with other people, but fascinating that sometimes you can be presenting to people, and as you said, there's that little insecurity clicks in, which they don't appear to be listening, or they're not listening in the way that I would like them to be listening, but they still are.
And that's just ego on the presenter's part and my part. You know, once you realise that they are perhaps just mulling things over and are happy in their own thoughts, listening attentively, maybe doodling as they do so, that can be perceived as not paying attention. But actually, I test to see if they're listening by asking their opinion on something or their perspective, because the person who's genuinely not interested will go, I don't know what you said. The introvert will be able to give a measured opinion and a different perspective on what you just said, and then you know that they're an introvert.
That's a really interesting observation. Thank you. What other traits do you see in terms of successful introverts?
I see that they are less likely to give themselves the label that the general public do of introvert. So I know in previous podcasts you've talked about the identity level of introversion and the label of being an introvert. And I mean, some of the psychologists I've interviewed, for example, they would suggest that we shouldn't say I am introvert, because when we use those I am words, we attach that possession and ownership of a condition. So what we perhaps could do with saying is, I can do introvert at times.
Big thing, as we were saying earlier, just because there's a label that either I or somebody else attaches doesn't mean I have to behave according to that label.
And also at a fundamental level, if we conform to the label, then we're allowing other people and situations to determine who we are and what we do and how we operate.
Absolutely, which is just daft wherever we're coming from and whatever our angle. Are there any other bits that come out of these interviews that you've done? Anything else you've noticed when you think about introverts and extroverts?
Yes. I mean, it's the polar extremes that fascinate me of this. So the extrovert can be perceived by the introvert as being over the top, full of exuberism, wanting to be showing off and a need for acceptance and the spotlight. When sometimes, actually, an introvert can be reasonably outgoing when presenting or being extrovert in the centre of attention, perhaps because it serves the people they're with, not just themselves. So, for example, I class myself as in the middle of the party. So I'm neither severely extrovert or severely introvert. But I know at times, especially if I've had a busy week of work, all I want to do is sit in a dark room rocking in a corner quietly for 24 hours.
Oh, I can understand that one.
But when I'm presenting, because it's actually not about extroversion and ego, it's about genuinely trying to serve all the different learning styles in the room, I will give of myself professionally to try and present in a way that is going to hook as many people in that audience as possible. And that is exhausting for me, absolutely exhausting. But I do it because it's professional and it's of service. Some people could label it as, oh, you're not the same person on stage as you are off stage. Well, good. I wouldn't want to listen to David Hyner.
Well, I hope some other people do, David. But I know as well as that you've done a lot of work with people still in school.
Yeah.
Do you see this thing differently with youngsters?
Oh, great question. More than any generation in the last 35, in the last 35 years, things have changed. There were always teenagers who perhaps lacked confidence, or you could perhaps label them as having introversion. But there is a generation about to enter the workplace for whom they have taken the extreme end of introversion and allowed it to affect their emotional health and mental health. There is and I don't like using this word, but it is sadly true. There is an epidemic of emotional and mental ill health amongst young people in Great Britain at the moment. And it displays itself with anxiety, panic attacks, depression. And some people say, well, how can you go from just being an introvert? That doesn't necessarily mean, I get that. But that's how it starts. Because the desire and the need of a human being to fit in and feel accepted, and just that general level of acceptance when you're young in this generation, more than any other in history, is so big. And if an introvert can't do that for any reason, that can play on them. That can really play on them, causes big problems.
Yeah, and I guess, I mean, as you implied there, being introverted is not in any way the same as being depressed or any of those other things. However, I can easily see how one can start to make you go, yeah, I'm going to sit quietly in the back room because that's what I prefer to do.
Yeah.
And then it can cycle on if you add to that society's pressures as well.
But then you get the opposite extreme. There's a guy I interviewed that I'm now great friends with called Jules Morgan. No one's ever heard of him, but he's a world-renowned marine design engineer, 12 times world powerboat racing champion. And you meet him and he has this front of being uber confident. He is a massive, massive introvert. But he says I say, where do you get your confidence from? He says, well, because being nice doesn't mean being weak.
That's fascinating.
I love that. He says, I don't shout in an argument because I don't have to, because I think. And when I think, I'm usually right.
Wow.
And do you know what? He is. And he talks about how people, the extroverts, tend to think outside of the box and get all excited. He says, I'm an engineer, I get inside the box and push the sides out as a thinker. So there are remarkable traits of an introvert that serve the world just as much as any other profile, and we need to celebrate them and engage them more.
That I would completely and wholeheartedly agree with. We haven't got that long left, Dave, but if you were to summarize your knowledge from all of the interviews you've done and go, what 2 or 3 tips could I offer introverts that are out here, or perhaps even people that manage introverts? Because as you implied earlier, it's as much about the way we communicate with each other as anything else.
The first tip would be like Jules Morgan: do introvert, but don't let it make you weak. The second tip is Robert Plant, the Led Zepp singer. Be an introvert, but when you have to, be the best at what you do, and don't be afraid to be an extrovert.
Yeah.
And the last one is Chopin. You can be a genius, and you don't have to shout about it. The world will always find the genius.
Oh, fantastic. Oh, I love those. Thank you so much, David. It's quite possible that some of the listeners would love to get back in touch with you if they wanted to do that. How would they do that, Dave?
I'm very easy to find. I'm over social media like a rash, John. But they can get me at my website, which is davidhyner.com, Hyner.
That's fantastic. David, thank you so much for your time. Really, really appreciate it.
God bless you, John. Thank you.
Thank you.